Listen up here, parents, coaches. The same thing happens with taking ibuprofen every day. If you take ibuprofen every day, your gymnast will not build muscle, or at least they'll build very minimal amounts of muscle compared to everyone else. And look, female athletes already have a hard time building muscle. They're not going to look like The Rock, most of them. And so we need to make sure we're giving them every advantage possible in order to build muscle. And if they're taking ibuprofen every day, they will not build muscle.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the NGA podcast. I'm your host, Rebecca Grady, and I am here with my incredible co-host,
Dr. Ian Kreider.
Rob Axelrod.
All right, so today we're going to talk about icing and heating. Since these are two of the most common therapeutic modalities used in sports, especially in gymnastics, and a lot of people are using them simply because that's what we were taught. A lot of us grew up hearing things like ice on for 20 minutes, ice off for 20 minutes, and we use that RICE protocol. But
she's just out here trying to trigger both of us right off the bat. Good grief.
I am. Yeah. But some of the thinking has shifted over time. So even the creator of the RICE protocol later clarified that icing doesn't speed healing the way that we once thought it did. So instead of just repeating old rules, we're going to pick Ian's brain and have him walk us through how he's thinking about icing and heating now and what actually makes sense in our world of gymnastics. So,
Sweet.
Ian.
So there are kind of... all the things. So there are a couple of categories to kind of think about here. So we have ice versus heat, but we can divide those into the type that we're using and the way and the purpose that we're using. What I mean by type is, are we using localized heat and ice, or are we using full body heat and ice? And those two things are used for very different reasons. And for purpose, we look at, are we looking to heal an injury, or are we looking to increase recovery or decrease time to recover? And so when you look at all those things, then you start to kind of come up with a little algorithm on when do I use ice versus when do I use heat. And I've changed my mind on things over the last few years. I've changed it to make it more specific along those kind of branches of when to use it, right? So originally it was ice everything. And when I was in college, I felt like I needed to, my shoulder was hurting, my ankle was hurting, and my wrist was hurting. And so I went, well, instead of getting 3 ice packs, I'll just jump in an ice bath. So instead of doing localized ice to try and help injury, really what I was doing is I was doing full body ice, and it was helping maybe with recovery. So we'll get into all those kind of misnomers and figure out exactly when we need those things. Then my thinking progressed to, well, actually, maybe ice decreases blood flow to an area. So don't we want blood flow in order to increase healing times? Yeah, that's probably true. So then I was like full on, just basically never use ice. Now I've kind of rethought things and made it a little bit more nuanced and go, all right, well, maybe ice is appropriate in some cases where we're not necessarily looking for healing, but maybe we're looking for recovery, or we're just looking for, hey, this is irritated for no good reason. Get that inflammation or irritation.
We have reduction of inflammation, right?
Yep. So sometimes we do need to reduce inflammation, but a lot of times we don't need to, or a lot of times it's something is hurting without being inflamed. And we kind of go, all right, well, what do we do in that case? So one thing I like to talk about is that RICE method. Is that, we all grew up with rest, ice, compression, elevation, and I do like 50% of those things. So rest is relative rest. So it's not complete rest. Most of the time you get worse with complete rest. Now, if something's broken, put it in a cast, but we're not talking about broken things for this podcast. We're talking about soft tissue injury and or recovery. And so a soft tissue injury like a sprain or a strain, we want relative rest. So yes, I sprained my ankle, but I still want to walk on it if I can, because I'm not going to do any damage to it by walking on it. I could do some damage if I tumble on it,
sure,
but I'm probably not going to do any damage by just walking on it. And so relative rest is good, but not total rest. And then ice, and I put ibuprofen in that I as well. So ice and NSAIDs, or non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. When we talk about that, we go, all right, well, is inflammation a good thing or is inflammation a bad thing? Well, let's talk about what inflammation is. First, it's just a chemical marker. So when I sprain my ankle, let's say I roll my ankle like I've done a few times in my life, my body produces these inflammatory markers, and that tells my body, hey, I need more good things here to help with healing. And so what that does is, we have veins and we have arteries, and in the middle of those we have capillaries. And these capillaries will kind of open up and get leaky in order to let this really big stuff like protein and all these cells that help chomp up all the loose bits and all that, right? So it gets leaky to let all this big stuff out. Well, in order to let the big stuff out, it's got to let little stuff out like water. And so we go, inflammation is good. Swelling is kind of a net neutral thing. It's not good or bad necessarily. As long as it can stay under control, then I don't need to control inflammation. And so I hope that makes sense, that inflammation is a good thing. It brings more blood flow to the area, but we need to control the swelling, because certainly I've seen inflammation get out of control. Like I was having this whole conversation one time with a basketball player that just rolled his ankle, and I started this conversation too early before I really started getting into like what symptoms he was having, because then like 2 minutes later we were talking about his symptoms. He's like, oh, and my toes are numb. I was like, oh, and we need ice and ibuprofen. All right, let's go. Because he had so much swelling that it was compressing his nerves, and that's a real bad thing.
Yeah, maybe it might be a good point where you could throw out there from the doctor's standpoint about the body's swelling is its own mechanism for limiting range of motion for a reason, to allow the body to heal on its own. So coming out of the doctor's mouth might be a great idea for you to kind of throw that in there now.
Yeah, for sure. So swelling certainly can limit range of motion. And in that super acute phase, that's a really good thing. We want to protect the injured site. Then, as soon as we're past that acute phase, we want to get range of motion back as soon as possible. So we do have to get the swelling out of there afterward. But like I was saying, we don't want so much swelling that we start compressing nerves and compressing arteries and things like that, where all of a sudden you go, hey, my toes are white. Why are my toes white?
Yeah.
Oh, that's not good, right? We've compressed an artery, and we're about to get into some trouble here, or we have to go to the ER. So we don't want that much swelling. But yeah, some swelling is perfectly fine and expected, right? And you roll your ankle so far that doctors will say, oh, you might as well have broken it. Not true. But anyway, you roll your ankle.
I heard that before.
For sure. Yeah. A doctor told my dad that one time, where he's like, oh, it would have just been better if you broke your ankle. Like, no, it wouldn't have, because if I broke my ankle, it still would have been sprained. So yes, technically broken things heal faster.
A broken bone heals faster, but it's still sprained. You're still gonna have to go through all the things you need to do to get back from that sprain, regardless. Yes. Easier without a broken bone. Maybe quicker, like you said, but
yeah, absolutely. So things like that just drive me bonkers. But yeah, so we want to get that swelling out of there. And so then we do that through the last two letters, which is compression and elevation. So I'm a big fan of compression and elevation, especially with our kids that have a lower limb injury and they're sitting in class all day. We definitely need some compression in order to help get that swelling back up out of their foot or their lower leg or something like that. Then elevation whenever they can. So that's the general thinking behind the RICE method now. Is as long as the swelling is under control and inflammation therefore is under control, then we don't need to do complete rest. We don't need to do ice and ibuprofen or other anti-inflammatory drugs.
Yeah, that's a good point, here at our podcast for parents, if parents are watching, and even coaches. We roll an ankle, and so we take a week off from gymnastics. Not a good idea. Like you said, we want to get our range of motion back as quick as possible. It doesn't mean we're like, okay, well, you sprained your ankle yesterday, we'll just tumble on tumble track today. Well, that's kind of not a good idea. Like maybe we come in and we do some band work or some compression work, and maybe even some icing, or depending, you're going to talk about that next, about some heat. But, best is to get it back moving as fast as possible, like Dr. Ian is talking about. And it's important that I think that some of us or all of us should realize that complete rest of taking off is not always the answer.
Yeah. And very rarely the answer. I've only had a handful of gymnasts where I've gone, hey, I have to kick you out of the gym. Like, there's no stretching that you can do in the gym. There's no conditioning that you can do while you're in the gym that isn't going to bother this area. And it's usually like mid, like core section related injuries. So, things like a fractured spine, a lot of times there's a little bit of stuff that you can do, but there's not a ton that you can do without irritating that area. Or I had a girl with a growth related apophysitis injury, which is like Sever's or Osgood-Schlatter's, but she had it in her hip. And I was like, there's like walking was super painful for her. I'm like, you just need to actually rest. Like, you need to just go home and rest. And then COVID hit and she became a cheerleader afterward. But anyway, it's fine. So anyway, it's so complete rest is almost never the answer, but is on occasion. And if it's that bad, hopefully they're seeing somebody that can tell you that that's appropriate. So yes, did you have something, Becca?
Yeah, well, I was going to ask when we're supposed to actually start icing, because I'm trying to go back to the stuff that I had previously learned, like back in the, the day. And is it still true that you want to get iced on right away for acute injuries, for pain, or are you wanting to do it later on?
Yeah, so I wait to see how the body's going to react. So
Okay.
I want to see how fast it's going to swell. Because right now, look, if it's a beam burn or something like that, yeah, throw some ice on it because that
Mhm.
seems terrible. But if it's a sprain or strain or something along those lines, I'm going to wait to see what the body does first. Because if the body reacts reasonably and says, hey, it's sprained, but I'm not going to just explode with swelling and go crazy, then I want the body to do what it does best, which is heal. But if it's going to go out of control and have this kind of cascading effect or negative feedback effect of it's hurt, so I'm swelling, it's hurt, so I'm swelling, it's hurt, so I'm swelling, then all of a sudden it just blows up and you can't even tell it's an ankle anymore. All right, let's go ahead and get that under control. But yeah, if it's just minimal amounts of swelling, minimal to even moderate amounts of swelling, and again, it can be controlled with compression and elevation. And you can go, hey, if I elevate this for 10 minutes, the swelling goes away. Perfect. The body's responding really well. It's doing what it's supposed to do. It's not overreacting to this injury. And so I'm not going to throw ice on it right away.
Makes sense.
Yeah, last episode, well, it wasn't really on our episode, but we were just chatting about it, about, the old school 20 on, 20 off. And I think it's probably appropriate to throw it in here about that. And, doctor, back me up on this one, I'm sure, but that whole old school mentality of 20 minutes on, 20 minutes off, depending on what you're doing. I mean, yes, you can get some relief, topically, from that 20 minutes. But in order for the ice to have those therapeutic properties, you've got to wait in between your icing until the interior temperature returns to normal, or like the other body part that wasn't iced. And you
Yep.
don't
Yeah,
know
the
what that
bones and the
is.
ligaments
The
and
bones and the
yeah.
ligaments, right? And so that's why I'm big, if it's an ankle or a wrist or something, ice bucket, right? 7 minutes, 7 to 9 minutes is like that number that has been researched to be out there. I think it's still in effect, that number of 7 to 9
Yeah.
minutes. And then it's
All
4
right.
hours. Yeah, I mean, it's, if you do a nice full ice bucket, 7 to 9 minutes for an ankle is plenty. And in fact, it
It's
hurts.
plenty of time.
It's,
Yes.
and it hurts.
Yep.
And so sometimes I recommend to put on a sock and then put your ankle into the ice bath. Reduces the stinging of how cold your skin actually gets, but it gets down into the bone, into the ligaments, and that's where you get your therapeutic properties. But you're 4 hours away or 5 hours away from doing it again, or even waiting until the next day. Not, okay, it's been 20 minutes, let's stick it back in an ice bucket. That's
Right.
not the idea.
That's a massive change, though, from 20 minutes off to 4 hours. Where did they figure that out? Do you know?
I don't know that answer, but I can tell you that I have an exercise science degree, so that's my background with a minor in exercise physiology. And so the studying of those things, that's where that came to fruition for me back in college, was that this whole 20 on, 20 off, not really sure where it came from, but it's the easiest thing for somebody to pop out of their mouth. And, every doctor and every parent and every household has heard that before. When in
Yeah.
fact, late to mid 90s, it's not correct. And maybe, Dr. Ian, you could capitalize on it. You got the doctor in front of your name.
Yeah. Yep. And I think you did a great job on it. I think one thing to know is that if you ice too much, you can actually do damage. You can cause what's called like a neuropraxia, where you damage the nerve. That actually happened to me. So I was at Flip Fest, and over the weekend, they're like, "Hey, if you want to make some more money, you can coach this cheer camp that's coming in." And they had 150, 200 cheerleaders or whatever coming in for this cheer camp. And so basically you're just a spotter. You're just spotting all weekend. And so, I had one cheerleader that was like, "Hey, sometimes I forget to jump on my back handspring." I was like, "What?" And then she did. And then my elbow was hurting. So during Flip Fest, they do like this big introduction of all the staff, and they come out from a curtain and they announce and high five all the kids, and it's super cool. And so I was one of the first ones out, and so I was sitting there icing my elbow, listening to John and John give rules of camp and all that. And I noticed that my last two fingers, my pinky and ring finger, went numb. I was like, that's weird. I should probably take off that ice. And it took a few hours for me to get my feeling back in my fingers. And it took 6 months to get feeling back in my forearm again. It was completely dead numb for 6 months.
Some of those injuries, right? Especially elbows are really sensitive. There's not a lot of skin, muscle, and or fat around that joint. And you have to be careful with those icing of those. And, we could go on probably for quite some time and talk about this, but that's just a basic, you think about it, it's similar to the ankle. There's not a lot of meat, so to speak, skin. Your thickness of your skin is the same all over the body, but how much muscle is there and how much fat is there? And look at your ankles, not much.
Yeah, I will say the elbow you got to be a little bit more careful with because you have more main nerves that are kind of surrounding the elbow. So the problem with me is I was icing my ulnar nerve, which is your funny bone. So that ulnar nerve runs right there.
Right
I guess you can't
really see it, but
all right, so there's my elbow. So there's the elbow part. There's the bone on the inside of the elbow. Right in between is where that ulnar nerve runs, and that's exactly where I had the ice. But on this outside, you have the radial nerve, and deeper in the middle, you have your median nerve. And so you've got a lot of nerves that kind of run all over the place in your elbow versus in your ankle. Most of the nerves run more on the inside of the ankle, kind of like where your ankle bones come together, like where your 2 feet come together. That's what I'm calling the inside there. You have one main nerve that runs in there, and then everything else is a little bit better protected. And most people don't injure the inside of their ankle, they injure the outside of their ankle. So icing the outside of your ankle is not as big of a deal, but you still need to be careful with it.
The outside ankle, the lateral malleolus.
That's right. Okay. That's right.
So I probably missed this because I've literally been coughing
for like coughing fit over there.
For all you
the last 10 minutes.
For all you podcast watchers out there, Miss Rebecca's got a cough going on.
Yeah, if you're not watching the video,
you can't see it because you only see us when we're talking. So she's not talking, turns her mic off, and hacking away.
I know I hide myself when I'm coughing, but
but as long as that purple little window is not showing up, they can't see us.
Yeah, that's right.
I know. But what I was going to ask is, so in the areas that you were talking about for icing too long, so does it traumatize the nerve? Is that what you were talking about?
Yeah, it actually damages the nerve.
Yeah. Okay, that's what I thought. But I didn't hear that, so I didn't know.
So I want to throw a little something in there. You take a football player, for example. I think that's where people really started noting that ice baths were a thing. But, football players are full body contact, tackling, using every muscle in their body. And at the end of a game, their whole body just needs a little bit of reduction of some inflammation or even some reduction of pain. In gymnastics, these kids go to a workout and they do a 3-hour workout. And I'm not knocking college at all. And I'm not knocking any of our profession. I would never do that. But if you're not injured, in gymnastics, we're using whole body too. A little bit different, right? It's not a contact sport. Yes, we're doing some pounding here and there, but part of our training methods that we use in gymnastics, we're trying to get stronger. And if we immediately after training go jump ourselves in an ice bath, we take all of the muscle, the blood flow away from the muscle. And for musculature purposes and strengthening purposes, we want more blood flow to go to those areas. And that's how we get stronger. And I feel personally that you're taking away from that, if a bodybuilder goes into the gym and does legs, right? They get their legs pumped up. They did a really long, hard workout, and then they go jump in an ice bath. They're defeating the purpose of trying to do muscle building. You're taking everything you just did to build muscle, tearing down fibers, rebuilding fibers. That increases musculature size and strength. And maybe, again, Dr. Ian will chime in on this one is, we're not trying to be bodybuilders as gymnasts, obviously, but we are trying to get stronger. And even though we're not tearing and ripping muscle fibers like a weightlifter would do, we still need that blood flow to be there for recovery before we ice. And I think that's important. I think it's, again, my opinion, and Doc's going to talk about it.
Yeah, well, obviously you're completely wrong, but not just kidding. So, no, that is absolutely 100% correct.
Wait, I'm sorry. Can you say that one more time? Just want to hear it.
That's right. You are 100% correct, sir.
Jeez. He said wrong if you missed that.
He said wrong. Okay, I just want to make sure.
So, so gymnasts and coaches and parents too, you've experienced this, right? But if you have soreness the next day, the reason why is because you've damaged the muscle and now it's rebuilding. So soreness comes from damaged muscle and it feels sore. And we got to give it time then to build back up, which we've talked about in other podcasts. That's why we periodize our conditioning. We don't just do full body conditioning every single day. because then we're not actually letting anything build back up again. But for the purposes of ice and recovery now, so we talked about kind of ice and injury, now ice and recovery, what ice baths will do, like what Rob said, is it will cause some short-term speedy recovery, where we go, hey, I have to be ready for, like for football, I have to be ready for a game tomorrow. For gymnastics, I need to be ready for a meet tomorrow. You could do an ice bath and get very quick recovery, feel better the next day, at the expense, though, of building muscle. And so that's where Rob was definitely hit the most important part there, is that when you do this damage to your muscle, that causes inflammation. Inflammation is a good thing because it's going to tell your body, hey, I need more stuff to build more muscle in this area. And so let's say you're in summer practice and you're trying to build muscle every day, but you're taking an ice bath after practice every day. Well, now you're stopping that inflammatory process immediately after practice, and now you're not getting the benefit of it, and now you're not going to build muscle like you're supposed to. The same thing, listen up here, parents, listen up here, coaches, the same thing happens with taking ibuprofen every day. If you take ibuprofen every day, your gymnast will not build muscle, or at least they'll build very minimal amounts of muscle compared to everyone else. And look, female athletes already have a hard time building muscle. They're not going to look like The Rock, most of them. And so we need to make sure that, well, and look, The Rock wouldn't even look like The Rock. But anyway, so we need to make sure we're giving them every advantage possible in order to build muscle. And if they're taking ibuprofen every day, they will not build muscle.
So if they're wanting to use ice baths and they're wanting to use ibuprofen every once in a while, what would be the best plan to do that? So it's therapeutic, but it's not stopping that muscle development.
Yep. So what the research says for ice baths is like at a minimum, you have to wait at least 4 hours after a workout before you start doing an ice bath.
There you go.
So that way the body's had enough time to go, oh yeah, I need more stuff here. And it gets the stuff there and your body starts working on building more muscle. So you've got to wait at least 4 hours.
Yeah.
Now again,
that's
though,
important.
if I have a gymnast that's real,
I was just saying that's super important for people to, everybody to realize that, that ice bath could come in handy. Go to practice, go home, do what you have to do. And, so a lot of people have these cold plunge tubs, then, hey, 4 or 5 hours later, hop in for 5 minutes.
Yeah. Yep. And so now, like something I told my gymnasts before our meet this past weekend, my upper level gymnasts, I'm not telling this to 8-year-olds. Okay. But my teenagers that one are old enough for their bodies to be able to regulate temperature well, right? So they have all the hormones in place, they have the reactions in place, so they can regulate temperature well, and they have enough skin to regulate temperature well. That's a big thing. So that's like a weird thing to say, I realize out loud. But literally,
it does seem kind of weird, yeah.
Yeah, we are better, especially with heat, and we'll get into this with heat, but especially with heat, we're better at regulating temperature the more skin we have, because you can sweat better and more effectively, because every square inch of skin has so many sweat glands and the ability to sweat. And if you have less square inches of skin, you have less ability to sweat.
Yeah. And then you have to think about, what is the actual maturization of those sweat glands? Are they really up to speed and old enough, mature enough to sweat when necessary? And these little ones don't necessarily have that.
No, definitely not. So you look at, especially little, like you can see it best in probably 5 years old and younger. You can see that they have like an all or nothing response to heat, where they go run around in the backyard somewhere with their friends. They come back and you're like, did it rain outside? Why are you soaking wet right now? And your face is beet red, and right. And that's because their body went
making so much sense to me right
now.
Well,
it's the body's ability to not be able to regulate temperature.
Yep. So they have almost no regulation ability. And so their body goes, oh no, we're getting too hot. Release the Kraken. And they just completely do everything they can to cool off.
And that's why with little ones, they'll get to that point and then they're at most danger for like heat stroke, because they don't realize it's coming.
My kids are like, if we have the heat on, they go, I'm dying, it's so hot in here. Or then I turn it down and they're like, it's freezing, Mom.
Yes.
And they just want these extremes when I'm in a car.
That's their bodies. It's growing. It's maturing.
so
It's trying to figure out what to do with like all those things inside.
So that's not the reason why they're weird. There's other reasons why they're weird, but that's not
it's probably coming from me.
They're just your children.
They're just from Becca.
That's right. Oh goodness. Yeah. So full body ice. Like I'll tell my teenagers, before the meet this past week, I said, hey, if you feel, because we're in the part of season right now where we're still doing appropriate amounts of conditioning to maintain their strength. And so sometimes the week before meet is actually heavy conditioning just because that's the way the plan is. And unfortunately, it's a poorly timed meet. And so they might be doing heavy conditioning that week, and they might have a lot of routines that week because we're trying to peak at state or peak at regionals or whatever it is. And so they might be sore when they go into a meet, unfortunately, this year at some point in time. And so I told them, like, hey, this past week was kind of a hard week for you guys. If you feel like you're going to be sore, go home, take an ice bath. You'll feel better the next day, and you'll be good to go for the meet this weekend.
Yeah.
But I warned them in the summer to not do that because I want them to build muscle.
Yeah. And, speaking of soreness might be a great idea for us to throw in there now, DOMS, right? Delayed onset muscular soreness. And, another big not winging it. Just this is what we went to school for. I mean, this is what we use every day. And so it's like fresh in our minds, or at least for me every day.
Knowledge.
Just, it's easy to pull up because you kind of think about it often as you're training athletics. Yep. And so that whole thing of muscle soreness is the next biggest misnomer is that it's lactic acid buildup. It's absolutely incorrect. It's not lactic acid buildup. Your body builds up lactic acid while you're training, and then it needs to get rid of it. If I do legs today, it's Tuesday, I'm not sore on Wednesday. Usually I'm sore on Thursday. That's not lactic acid buildup. Unfortunately, that's what everybody said. It's usually gone by about 6 to 8 hours after your training.
Yeah.
But your Thursday soreness from your Tuesday training is just your body's way of repairing, like we just talked about. You're supposed to have some soreness. Your body has to repair the damage to the muscle fibers. And when I say damage to the muscle fibers, that's what we must do, is actually push those muscle fibers to where they're micro breaks, micro tears. I mean, it's on a very high level to understand it. But basically, you're tearing down muscle and then you're building, and then you're tearing down muscle and then you're building. Then you get your hypertrophy, but we're not looking for hypertrophy as much in gymnastics or gymnasts per se. We're looking for the strength aspect of it, which is going to go through the same principle because we're not training like bodybuilders.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Good. All right. So we used localized ice, we did full body ice, localized heat then, and full body heat. And our second episode is...
All right. So thank you so much, Ian and Rob, for helping to update all of us on everything that has changed regarding icing as a therapeutic modality in sports. And more specifically, thank you for breaking down why the old 20 on and 20 off rule for icing isn't recommended anymore, and how the ways we think about icing has really shifted over the years. So if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe, ring that bell, and share it with anyone who can benefit from this conversation. And make sure to tune into our next episode where Ian and Rob are going to break down all things heat. So thank you so much for joining us here at the MGA podcast. And until next time, stay happy, healthy, and high performing.